So back in 1992, two Apple designers walked into the patent office with a simple drawing of their work. They had crafted this really elegant, intuitive information icon for a digital interface.
Yeah.
And, the application was properly filed, fees were paid, all that.
Right. They expected their property rights to be secured. I mean, they honestly believed the system was designed to protect exactly this kind of digital innovation.
Yeah, but the rejection they got back, it had absolutely nothing to do with the quality of their design. The examiner didn't argue the icon lacked novelty or that it was obvious.
No, the rejection was issued for one completely bewildering reason. The designers failed to draw a computer screen around their icon.
Wait, really? Just because it was screen?
Yeah. The government essentially refused to protect the software until the designers, pretended they were manufacturing a physical monitor.
So the office issued this formal procedural demand for a broken line depicting a physical hardware monitor.
Yeah.
And this became known as the infamous Stryland case.
Exactly. And that single administrative decision in 1992 birthed, a 30-year institutional obsession within the patent system. It set this precedent that fundamentally misunderstood the actual nature of software.
Because suddenly, software designers were forced to act like hardware manufacturers. You couldn't just walk into the office and claim a digital design anymore.
Right. You had to tether your digital creation to a plastic box. This forced a whole generation of innovators to basically misrepresent the nature of their own products.
Which brings us to the reality you face today. Imagine you're an inventor who just created a fully functional three-dimensional holographic interface for surgical planning.
Okay, yeah.
You own the underlying code. You own the precise visual output projected right into the air of the operating room.
But under this rigid institutional system, you stand to lose your intellectual property rights entirely because the examiner is going to look at that holographic projection and demand you draw a physical plastic screen.
Right. They demand hardware that simply does not exist in your actual technology. The cognitive dissonance here is just staggering.
Oh, it's completely out of touch. You're building for the frontier of spatial computing, yet the government is forcing you to draft legal documents as if you're manufacturing desktop monitors back in 1992.
It creates this legal fiction that really punishes the most advanced creators. You have to inject obsolete hardware into your patent drawings just to satisfy a bureaucrat's checklist.
And if you refuse to draw the fake screen, your application is just thrown out.
Yeah. To understand where this friction even comes from, you have to think about the concept of a tattoo. Imagine an artist designs this brilliantly intricate tattoo.
Okay.
You can't own that tattoo design if it's just, floating in empty space.
Yeah.
It has to exist somewhere.
Right, because the ink requires a canvas to give it physical form. The design must be applied to a body. I mean, the body is what actually grounds the art in reality.
Exactly. The body is what makes the design tangible in the eyes of the law. And this everyday reality, it mirrors the core mandate of 35 U.S.C. Section 171.
Which is where we get the article of manufacture requirement.
Right. The statute dictates that a design must be applied to a physical, manufactured thing. Congress wrote this rule to create a strict boundary between industrial design and fine art.
Yeah, they wanted to protect manufactured goods, not just abstract concepts. The law is explicitly clear on its intent there.
It states that whoever invents any new, original, and ornamental design for an article of manufacture may obtain a patent. The critical legal phrase there is for an article of manufacture.
Because you can't patent a mere picture or a disembodied pattern, a painting on a canvas, well, that's protected by copyright law.
Right, but a unique curvature applied to the fender of a sports car that is protected by a design patent.
But proving that your design is attached to a manufactured article requires a very specific method of drafting. Imagine you're drawing a blueprint for a custom steering wheel.
Okay, yeah. You want to show the manufacturer exactly how it fits into the vehicle.
So you sketch the car's dashboard in this faint, thin pencil just to show where the wheel goes, but you only draw the steering wheel itself in dark, heavy ink.
Right, because the contrast tells the manufacturer what to focus on. The dark ink represents what you actually invented.
Right.
And what you intend to claim as your property.
Exactly. The faint pencil is merely environmental context. And this brings us to the legal concept known as the broken line rule.
Right. In patent illustration, that faint pencil is executed as a dashed or broken line. It shows the environmental structure surrounding your invention.
Crucially, though, that broken line forms zero part of the claimed design itself. It's just context.
So by using the broken line, you are legally telling the government, hey, I do not own the dashboard, I only own the steering wheel. It provides scale without improperly expanding your patent scope.
Right. It's a vital tool for narrowing your claim to exactly what you invented. And from a practical standpoint, the statute governing this is actually incredibly broad.
Yeah, it really is. The courts have stated an article of manufacture can be almost anything made by human hands or by machinery. It doesn't have to be, a solid block of metal or plastic.
Right. The legal precedents have interpreted this statutory mandate with remarkable flexibility over the decades. Just consider the famous legal precedent involving a water fountain.
Oh, right. The courts actually ruled that water spraying from a specialized fountain nozzle qualifies as an article of manufacture.
Think about that. The physical shape of the water was temporary, fluid, constantly changing, but that specific shape was dictated by a human-made tool.
Because the metal nozzle forced the water into a specific design, the court ruled the water itself became the manufactured article.
Exactly. So a careful software inventor reads this history and builds a highly logical expectation. They construct a complex, interactive virtual reality environment.
And they assume the law will protect their digital interface because it's human-made and relies on a machine to exist. They look at the water fountain case and see a direct parallel.
Because the software code shapes the digital pixels exactly as the metal nozzle shapes the water. The inventor logically expects the legal framework to recognize this digital article of manufacture.
Yeah, the statute's flexible language clearly supports this interpretation. If fluid water qualifies as an article of manufacture, a coded interface generated by a processor certainly should.
The legal foundation for protecting software is solid, but that assumption completely ignores the harsh reality of how the bureaucracy actually operates.
Right.
You have to leave the theoretical courtroom and look at the reality of the examiner's desk. The law on the books rarely matches the procedure in the trenches.
So true. Imagine a city building inspector who is hired to ensure a new skyscraper is safe for human occupancy. Their formal job description demands they assess structural integrity, load-bearing walls, all that.
They're supposed to evaluate the complex engineering of the entire structure.
But instead of looking at the foundation, this inspector walks in with a laminated one-page checklist. He only approves or rejects the building based on whether the hallway light switches are exactly 48 inches from the floor.
He ignores the engineering entirely. The building could be an absolute structural hazard, just ready to collapse in a strong wind.
Yeah. But if those light switches are at the precise height on his checklist, he signs the approval.
Yeah.
He relies on the checklist because it requires, no critical thinking.
And this is the exact dynamic embedded in MPP 11004.01a. The MPP is the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure, and it serves as the examiner's ultimate unyielding checklist.
Right. This manual dictates the daily behavior of the entire examining corps. The office largely ignores the broad, flexible wording of the actual congressional statute.
They don't care about the nuanced water fountain precedent when they look at your software application. They look exclusively at the procedural steps outlined in their manual.
The manual tells them exactly what visual elements to look for, leaving zero room for philosophical interpretation. They've turned the nuanced statutory requirement of an article of manufacture into a rigid binary drawing test.
It has devolved into a purely visual compliance exercise. If you want to protect a graphical user interface today, the manual demands a sacrifice.
You are forced to draw a display panel in broken lines around your digital design. It's an absolute requirement for passing the initial review.
And it does not matter if your software is designed to run on a smartwatch, a mobile phone, or like a massive stadium jumbotron. The examiner just needs to see that broken line rectangle somewhere on the page.
If the rectangle is missing, your application is immediately rejected. They treat the absence of that dashed line as a fatal legal flaw.
But the absurdity goes deeper than just the visual drawings. The office has actually begun to weaponize grammar against inventors.
Yeah, this part is wild. It's no longer just about whether you drew the broken lines. It's about the exact prepositions you use in your title and your paperwork.
The examiners parse your sentences looking for technicalities to exploit. The office routinely rejects applications that use the phrase icon for a computer screen.
Wait, they reject it just for saying for?
Yes. They argue that the word for legally implies the icon is separate from the screen itself, and they claim this separation violates the rule that the design must be applied to an article.
So they force the applicant to change the title to computer screen with an icon. This might sound like a trivial semantic debate, but it fundamentally shifts the entire legal definition of your property.
Right. By Changing that one preposition, you are no longer patenting the software interface you actually invented. You are suddenly patenting a physical piece of hardware that just happens to be displaying your software at that specific moment.
You've effectively claimed the plastic box. But the office is fundamentally wrong in this approach. The actual statute does not demand these granular grammar games.
No, the manual has created an artificial barrier that Congress never intended. The statute certainly does not demand broken lines for things that exist natively in three-dimensional spatial computing.
This institutional habit just widens the gap between the formal law and the reality of modern technology. The bureaucracy has completely lost touch with how software is built.
And let's calculate the real-world cost of this specific bureaucratic hurdle. Applicants are burning thousands of dollars in legal fees fighting over these prepositions.
Yeah, they're paying attorneys by the hour to debate the word with versus the word for.
Startups spend months, sometimes years, locked in prosecution with a stubborn examiner. The back-and-forth arguments just drain the critical capital of early-stage companies.
They're fighting administrative delays instead of building their products. And to survive the process, you're forced to file two-dimensional plan views of dynamic, three-dimensional software.
Right, you have to flatten your spatial invention into a series of static, lifeless drawings. You degrade your own invention just to appease an outdated manual.
Meanwhile, the technology sector has completely bypassed this procedural framework. I mean, innovation moved rapidly from flat screens to atmospheric projections, holograms, and augmented reality.
The hardware has basically become invisible. These new technologies inherently do not have physical display panels for you to draw.
The user looks through a lens, or the digital image is beamed directly into their physical environment. There's no bevel, no frame, no monitor stand.
Which means the office's rigid drawing rules effectively block modern spatial computing from entering the patent system. You can't physically draw a broken line screen if the room itself serves as the screen.
The entire regulatory framework just breaks down. The tension over this mismatch, it finally reached a breaking point. The office had to acknowledge that they were systematically rejecting the most advanced technology in the world over dashed lines.
Yeah, the internal metrics were becoming an embarrassment. The complaints from industry leaders and major tech conglomerates grew way too loud to ignore.
The discrepancy between the statute's broad intent and the examiner's narrow checklist was legally indefensible. The office realized a massive correction was necessary.
And this brings us to a highly anticipated shift in the regulatory landscape. On March 13th, 2026, the United States Patent and Trademark Office issued new supplemental guidance.
Right, and the industry believed the office was finally going to align its procedures with the reality of digital design. And on its face, this new guidance is revolutionary.
It is. It explicitly states that examiners can no longer require broken lines of a display panel in the drawings.
The visual mandate that haunted the industry since 1992 is officially dead.
Okay.
Furthermore, it specifically addresses the weaponized grammar that stalled so many applications.
Exactly. The guidance explicitly states examiners must now accept the word for in the title line. The semantic war appears to be over.
You can now file an application titled Projected Interface for a Computer and omit the screen entirely. The broken lines are gone, and the prepositions are corrected.
The legal pathway seems clear and unobstructed. On the surface, it looks like a complete, unequivocal victory for software developers.
It really does. The procedural hurdles that choked innovation for decades seem to have been dismantled by a single memo. It looks like the system finally works.
Right.
It appears the structural gap is finally closed. The office has seemingly recognized software, standing completely on its own merits, as a valid article of manufacture. The industry breathed a massive sigh of relief.
But you must look closer at the actual text of the guidance. You have to read what is quietly written in the margins, because the headline is just a distraction from the underlying mechanics of the new rule.
Wait, what do you mean?
There is a severe, crippling limitation embedded deep in this new directive. What the industry hasn't fully accounted for is that the hardware requirement was never actually removed. The tether still exists.
Oh, wow.
The requirement was merely relocated to a less obvious place. The compliance burden moved from the visual drawing sheet directly to the verbal title line. The trap simply changed its appearance.
So the leash holding your software to a piece of physical hardware is still firmly attached. The office is just using a different clip to secure it.
Exactly. They haven't abandoned their core philosophy regarding physical objects. The new guidance explicitly states that a digital image not tied to a computer remains a transient picture.
And in the eyes of the office, a transient picture is legally unpatentable. If it does not originate from a named device, it just doesn't exist.
Right. If you don't explicitly name a physical host device in your paperwork, your application will still face immediate rejection. The fundamental philosophy of the Patent Office hasn't changed one bit. They just hid the requirement.
That's wow.
Think of an exclusive nightclub that has always required a tailored jacket at the door. For years, patrons constantly complained about this incredibly strict, outdated dress code.
Because the rule alienated half their potential clientele.
Right. Finally, management caves to the pressure and announces a massive policy change. They put up signs declaring that tailored jackets are no longer required for entry.
So the patrons celebrate the new, relaxed atmosphere.
But when you arrive at the door wearing a t-shirt, the bouncer immediately turns you away. The new policy quietly requires a collared shirt instead.
The specific garment changed, but the fundamental restriction remains intact. The dress code evolved, but the door is still firmly closed if you lack the right clothing.
You still have to wear exactly what management demands. The illusion of freedom masks a new layer of control, and this is the legal concept of the verbal hardware anchor.
So you no longer have to draw the hardware on the page, but you must verbally anchor your design to it in the text.
Exactly. The burden shifted from the illustrator to the attorney. Stripping the broken line screen from your drawings doesn't actually liberate your application.
It just forces you to move the hardware limitation into your chosen words. The hardware must still be present.
An applicant who reads the new guidance and assumes they are finally free might file a title like Holographic Navigation Interface. They include 0 device references because the visual mandate was lifted.
They think they followed the new rules.
They will still get rejected without hesitation. The examiner simply uses a different rejection code from their updated manual. The outcome is exactly the same as it was in 1992.
Because instead of failing the visual drawing test, you now fail the verbal title test. The examiner will state that your holographic interface, without a named host device, is merely a transient picture.
Yep, your application is dead on arrival. The physical hardware leash remains the ultimate controlling factor.
The office simply changed the compliance mechanism to alleviate the visual absurdity of drawing screens for holograms. They solved the optical problem without fixing the legal problem.
You no longer have to draw the plastic box. But you absolutely still have to name the plastic box. The institutional neurosis survived the policy update entirely.
This realization changes everything about how you must approach protecting your digital assets. You must completely remap your filing strategy based on the specific gap in the rules.
You cannot rely on the surface-level reading of the guidance. Your strategy from this point forward depends entirely on your available resources.
Because the specific leverage you possess dictates the posture you must take with the examiner. Different players must play different games.
Let's first analyze the optimal defensive strategy for the under-resourced player. This category includes the early-stage startup, the independent inventor, and the small design firm.
Your options are limited by your runway. Your primary inescapable constraint is capital. You simply cannot afford to spend $50,000 arguing patent theory with the federal government.
Every dollar spent on legal fees is a dollar stolen from your engineering budget. So the biggest strategic trap you can fall into is fighting a philosophical war.
Right. Do not argue with an examiner over whether a hologram inherently qualifies as a tangible item. That is a debate for legal scholars, not startups trying to survive.
The individual examiner doesn't have the authority to change the rules for you anyway. They will simply issue another final rejection, and your lawyer will bill you for drafting the useless response.
You will lose the war of attrition. The office will bleed your capital dry before they ever concede a philosophical point on statutory interpretation.
Your only viable evasion tactic is strict, malicious compliance with their exact wording. You must play their exact game.
You must exploit the newly approved text precisely as it is written in the guidance. Keep your drawings incredibly clean, isolating the focus entirely on the digital interface itself.
Remove all visual noise. Do not draw the screen under any circumstances. Do not include a single broken line that even suggests a physical bezel, a monitor stand, or a projection lens.
Present the pure geometry of your software. Let the geometry of your interface stand completely alone on the visual page.
Then you satisfy the examiner's hardware requirement entirely in the title line. You feed them the exact words they want.
Use the specific titles explicitly listed and approved in the new guidance document. You type virtual reality interface for a computer, exactly as it appears in their examples.
Do not alter the phrasing. Do not get creative with your terminology. Do not try to invent a new noun for your spatial hardware.
Use the exact words the office provided because the examiner is just matching your text against their laminated list. The examiner looks at your title, sees the pre-approved format, and instantly checks the box.
The patent is allowed without a fight. You save thousands of dollars and months of delay. And more importantly, because you didn't draw the hardware, your scope of protection is vastly superior.
The legal claim is not artificially limited to a specific physical device's shape or dimensions. The pure software design is protected.
You have successfully secured the rights to the software's visual appearance. You bypassed the hardware trap by giving the bureaucracy the exact noun they demanded.
It is a calculated surrender of pride for a massive gain in property rights. But now, let's shift to the offensive strategy for the well-resourced player.
Right. This is the massive tech conglomerate or the heavily funded spatial computing pioneer. You operate under a completely different set of rules.
Your primary structural advantage is your legal budget. You have the capital to map the exact perimeter of this new guidance through brute force. You can afford to test the boundaries of the system.
You use that immense capital to engage in aggressive parallel filing. You don't choose between the old compliance rules and the new compliance rules. You utilize both mechanisms simultaneously to create an inescapable web.
You file application A using the old entrenched pre-2026 method. You draw your digital interface and you surround it with a traditional hardware screen and heavy broken lines. You cater to the old guard.
Then, on the exact same day, you file application B covering the identical software. This application strictly uses the new method. You are running two identical designs through two different procedural tracks.
You omit the hardware lines entirely from the drawings in application B. You use the newly approved for a computer title construction. You follow the new guidance to the letter.
You have now submitted the exact same interface geometry under two completely different compliance mechanisms. This dual-track approach creates a profoundly powerful leverage dynamic in future enforcement.
You have weaponized the office's transitional confusion. Let's analyze exactly how that leverage plays out in the real world. Imagine a well-funded competitor directly copies your unique interface design.
Right. They steal the exact geometry and launch a rival product. If the infringer puts that stolen interface on a traditional mobile phone or tablet, application A catches them instantly.
The broken line physical screen in your first patent perfectly matches their traditional physical product. The infringement is visually obvious to a judge.
But what if consumer technology shifts rapidly over the next 2 years? What if the infringer bypasses screens entirely and projects your stolen interface onto a living room wall using a new spatial computing headset?
The physical hardware no longer matches. Application A might fail to catch them because there's no physical screen on the wall for the broken lines to map onto.
A clever defense attorney will argue they do not infringe, but application B catches them immediately.
Application B has no drawn hardware to limit its enforcement reach. It claims the pure geometry of the interface for a computer. The portfolio effectively surrounds the underlying technology from all possible angles.
The exact same design geometry, filed twice under two different administrative compliance mechanisms, produces a massive enforcement reach. Neither application could possibly achieve this bulletproof level of coverage acting alone.
You are literally using the Patent Office's own bureaucratic transition against them to build a wider defensive moat. The administrative friction that destroys startups becomes your primary strategic advantage.
You buy the perimeter? This is exactly how the most sophisticated players dominate the intellectual property landscape.
They don't waste time complaining about the absurdity of the rules. They aggressively exploit the specific seams between those rules, and it is time to act directly on this intelligence.
If you are the under-resourced player, you must audit your entire pending design application portfolio immediately. Do not wait for the end of the quarter.
Open your files today. Run a keyword search for the word with in every single title and claim across your entire digital portfolio. You are hunting for the old hardware anchor.
Stretch it wherever you find it. If you currently have an application titled Display Screen with a graphical user interface, you are in extreme danger. Your scope is artificially narrowed to the physical screen.
Change that text immediately to graphical user interface for a display screen. That single, seemingly minor word swap fundamentally alters the boundaries of your property rights.
It detaches the design from the specific hardware. It legally removes the physical hardware limitation from your actual design scope.
You must file this amendment before your next office action arrives from the examiner. Speed is critical here.
If you wait until after the examiner issues an official action, the amendment costs more money to file. More importantly, the examiner's position is already formally entrenched, and they will stubbornly fight the change.
Fix it while the file is quiet. But if you are the well-resourced player, your operational directive is entirely different. Pull all of your upcoming augmented and virtual reality interface filings right now.
Halt your current filing pipeline. Duplicate the drawing sets for every single interface you plan to protect. Submit the first set with the hardware context drawn heavily in broken lines. Give them the 1992 standard.
Submit the second duplicated set with zero hardware in the drawings and explicitly approved for a computer title. You must force the office to process the exact same geometry under both mechanisms simultaneously.
Make them do the work twice. The financial cost to execute this parallel strategy is merely one additional filing fee per interface application.
For a well-resourced corporate player, that minor cost is literally a rounding error. It is statistically zero.
The return on that minor investment is an airtight coverage gap your competitors simply cannot walk through. You completely eliminate their ability to evade your patent by slightly changing their physical display hardware.
You lock them out of the market. Do not let a bureaucrat's reliance on physical hardware dictate the actual limits of your digital property.
Protect the pure geometry, secure the exact correct title, and relentlessly exploit the bureaucracy to your advantage.
You have to ask yourself a very serious question. Are you trying to patent the spatial future you actually built, or are you settling for the plastic box the government forced you to draw?